Natalie watched as Damien scrolled through the photos on his phone, his face illuminated by the dim glow of the screen. His expression was practiced, relaxed, a touch nostalgic, the look of a man reminiscing about his peaceful, solo getaway. "It was amazing," he sighed, tilting the screen towards her, a shot of a pristine beach, golden sand untouched by footprints. "So peaceful to travel alone." Natalie smiled, nodding as if she believed him, but her hands resting on her lap curled slightly into fists. She had already seen the bank statement. A quiet dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. A resort booking that listed 2 guests under confirmation details. And, the most damning of all, a charge from a boutique perfume shop in Santorini. Damien never wore cologne. She did not confront him then. Confrontation was a blunt instrument, messy, emotional. No, Damien's downfall needed to be as elegant as the life he had so carefully crafted. So she played the part. She leaned in, kissed his cheek, and murmured, "I'm glad you had a good time." And then, in the days that followed, she got to work. The pieces came together quickly. Damien's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He thought he was untouchable. He took risks, assuming Natalie was too trusting, too in love to ever question him. It took only 2 phone calls to find the right private investigator, discreet, professional, someone who had ruined men like Damien before. "I just need proof," she had said, her voice steady. Undeniable proof. 2 days later, a crisp manila folder was in her hands. Inside, glossy, high-resolution photographs of Damien, wrapped around another woman like she was the vacation, not the destination. Sienna. She was younger than Natalie expected. Not the usual polished trophy mistress, but someone who looked genuine, carefree, unaware of the web she had been pulled into. Natalie felt no anger toward her. No, the rage was reserved solely for Damien, the man who had played them both. She exhaled slowly, tracing a fingertip over the edge of one photograph. It was time to make her next move. 2 days later, Natalie stood in a high-end frame shop, watching as the employee carefully positioned one of the photos under glass. "A gift?" the woman behind the counter asked, making small talk. Natalie smiled, cold and sharp. "Oh yes," she said. "The perfect surprise." Natalie had always believed that true power wasn't in raising your voice. It was in making your presence felt without ever needing to. And that was exactly how she planned to dismantle Damien's perfect little world. The man had spent years perfecting the art of deception, but she would show him what real strategy looked like. For the next few days, she continued to act as if nothing had changed. She laughed at his jokes, made him his morning coffee, kissed him goodbye as he left for work. And all the while, the evidence of his betrayal sat neatly in her closet, waiting for its grand debut. Damien, ever the oblivious fool, went about his routine, never noticing the way her eyes lingered just a second longer when he mentioned his next business trip. He had no idea that she had already booked a reservation at his favorite steakhouse, for him, his colleagues, and a few special guests. As he texted on his phone one evening, smiling slightly at whatever lie he was weaving, Natalie was in their walk-in closet, carefully wrapping the framed photos in crisp, expensive gift paper. She tied the ribbons slowly, deliberately, imagining the moment he would open it. The exact second realization would dawn on his face, the room full of people witnessing his fall. Poetic justice, but she wasn't finished yet. Natalie needed to ensure that the reveal had maximum impact. A single moment of humiliation wouldn't be enough. She wanted the consequences to be permanent, inescapable. So she sent an anonymous tip to HR at Damien's firm. It was nothing dramatic, just an email accompanied by the most damning of the photos, the kind of proof that made it impossible to look the other way. A company that prided itself on professionalism wouldn't want one of its executives caught in a scandal, especially not when the affair involved a woman who, as it turned out, happened to be the marketing director of a rival firm. The irony was almost too perfect. By the time Natalie was done setting the stage, the pieces were arranged so meticulously that there was only one possible outcome. Damien would be ruined, publicly and professionally, and there would be no one to blame but himself. 2 days before the reveal, she made one final move. She reached out to Sienna. It wasn't an act of kindness, nor was it meant to be a warning. Natalie simply wanted to see the woman Damien had risked everything for. She sent a direct message through Instagram using an account with no identifying details. "You don't know me, but I know Damien. I think you should know him too. If you're free, meet me at the Pearl Cafe at noon tomorrow. No drama, no accusations, just truth." She half expected Sienna to ignore it, to dismiss it as some jealous woman trying to stir trouble, but the response came within an hour. "I'll be there." The next day, Natalie arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. She took a seat by the window, ordered a black coffee, and waited. Sienna arrived right on time. She was dressed in a casual linen dress, her dark hair tied into a loose braid. She looked younger in person, softer somehow, and Natalie could see why Damien had chosen her. She was the opposite of everything Natalie represented. Carefree, unassuming, someone who probably believed in the fairy tale Damien had fed her. Sienna approached hesitantly, her brows furrowed. "You're the one who messaged me?" Natalie nodded and gestured for her to sit. For a moment there was silence. Then Natalie pulled out the manila envelope she had brought with her and slid it across the table. Sienna hesitated before opening it, and when she did, her face drained of color. She flipped through the photos. Damien, holding her hand, kissing her forehead, leading her into a hotel suite. She whispered, "Oh my God." Natalie watched as emotions flickered across her face. Confusion, disbelief, then the slow, dawning horror of realization. "He told me he was single," Sienna murmured, shaking her head as if trying to make sense of it. "That he had been divorced for 2 years. Natalie smirked, unsurprised. "And you believed him?" Sienna looked up, guilt flashing in her eyes. "I had no reason not to. He never let me come to his place. He always came to me. He said it was because of work, that he was always traveling." Natalie leaned back, sipping her coffee. "Well, now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Sienna exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. I don't know." Natalie could see the battle happening in real time. Sienna wasn't just hurt, she was embarrassed. No woman wanted to find out she had been the other woman unknowingly. Natalie let the silence stretch before speaking again, her voice calm, almost clinical. "If I were you, I'd make sure he regrets ever playing both of us. You see, I've already set up my part of the revenge. But, if you really want closure, I suggest you make sure you're there when it all falls apart." Sienna swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" Natalie smiled. "Come to his office on Friday, around noon. Trust me, you won't want to miss it." Sienna stared at her, processing everything. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay." Natalie stood, tossing a few bills on the table. "See you there." As she walked out of the cafe, she felt lighter. Everything was in place now. Damien's destruction was no longer just inevitable, it was imminent. And the best part? He still had no idea. The morning of the reveal was crisp and clear, the kind of day that would normally put Damien in an excellent mood. He thrived in control, in certainty. He walked into his office that day without a single worry, blissfully unaware that the walls around him were about to come crashing down. Natalie, on the other hand, had never felt so calm. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. She had spent weeks crafting this moment, each move executed with precision. This was not a reckless act of revenge. It was a work of art. By noon, the framed photographs were already waiting for him at his office. Wrapped impeccably in shimmering silver paper, the package sat atop his desk, looking as elegant as any anniversary gift. His assistant had placed it there as instructed, assuming it was a thoughtful gesture from his devoted girlfriend. Except, of course, Natalie was anything but devoted now. She had chosen his lunch hour carefully. It was the time when most employees took a break, but a handful always lingered, chatting, grabbing coffee, making plans. Enough people to ensure there were witnesses, but not so many that the moment would lose its intimacy. Damien strolled into the office, just as Natalie had predicted. Relaxed, confident, his mind still basking in the success of his latest lie. He barely glanced at his assistant as he pushed open the door to his office. Then he saw the package. For a moment he simply stood there, his head tilting slightly in curiosity. He ran his fingers over the ribbon, a small smirk playing on his lips. He loved surprises, especially the kind he believed he deserved. The first sign that something was wrong came when he unwrapped the box and found a simple wooden frame inside. His smirk faded slightly. He wasn't sure what he had expected. Maybe a personalized gift from Natalie, some sentimental token to remind him of their relationship. But then he turned the frame over, and his world shattered. A photograph of himself standing on the balcony of a Santorini resort, his arms wrapped intimately around Sienna, both of them laughing in the golden afternoon light. The kind of photo that couldn't be denied, couldn't be excused away. His breath hitched. His hands, once so steady, began to tremble. He flipped the frame forward, his mind racing, and there, behind the first image, was another, and another. each one more damning than the last. The door to his office was still open. The moment his assistant gasped, Damien knew he wasn't alone. Within seconds, murmurs spread through the room like wildfire. His team, the colleagues who had admired him, who had trusted his leadership, were now standing in clusters outside his door, exchanging glances, whispering. Then, the final blow. Sienna stepped into the office. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least not in Damien's mind. But Natalie had ensured that she received an invitation. And the moment Sienna saw the photos, saw the way Damien's face had drained of color, she understood everything. "You told me you were single," she said, her voice sharp but trembling. Damien turned to her, panic flickering in his eyes. "Sienna, I can explain." "Don't." She held up a hand, her expression shifting from hurt to disgust. "You're a liar, Damien. You played me. You played both of us." She turned, walking past the growing crowd of onlookers. And just as Damien thought the nightmare couldn't get any worse, his phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Natalie. "Enjoy the show, you earned it." And with that, she blocked his number. Outside, she sat at a cafe across the street, sipping her coffee as she watched the chaos unfold. Damien had built his life on deception. She had simply given him the stage to watch it all crumble. The weight of the silence in the office was suffocating. Damien could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the occasional shuffle of feet, but nothing else. No one spoke. No one moved. The room was frozen in time, except for the growing whispers outside his office. The framed photos sat on his desk like a time bomb that had just detonated. Every image, every piece of proof was staring back at him, and no amount of smooth talk could erase what had already been seen. The reality of his downfall was setting in, pressing against his chest like a crushing weight. His assistant, who once greeted him with a warm smile every morning, was backing away toward the door, her wide eyes darting between the pictures and Damien's increasingly panicked expression. He could hear the hushed voices of his co-workers just outside, the unmistakable sound of shock turning into judgment. Then came the first burst of laughter. It was quiet at first, just a small chuckle from someone who probably couldn't help themselves. But it was enough. The moment that sound broke through the tension, the entire office seemed to exhale at once. Snickers turned into giggles, giggles into full-blown laughter. Damien's face burned with humiliation. "Man, this is brutal," someone muttered under their breath. "Wow, and he thought he was being sneaky?" another voice chimed in. His carefully curated image, the charming executive, the seasoned traveler, the man who always had things under control, was shattering right in front of him. And the worst part? There was nothing he could do to stop it. Desperation clawed at his throat as he turned to Sienna, his last possible ally in the room. She had not moved from where she stood, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The hurt in her eyes had hardened into something unrecognizable. Contempt. "Sienna," he started, reaching out slightly, but she stepped back immediately. "Don't," she said coldly. "Just don't." Her voice was steady, but he could see the tremble in her hands. She wasn't just angry, she was embarrassed. She had believed his lies, let herself fall into his world, and now she was being dragged down with him. "I deserve better than this," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to him. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Damien wanted to go after her, to fix this, to fix everything, but the reality was sinking in fast. There was no fixing this. His phone buzzed again. He snatched it off the desk, praying it was Natalie, that she had sent some kind of message, maybe an explanation, a warning, anything. But all he saw was a notification, his company email flashing with a new subject line. "Urgent, mandatory HR meeting at 3 p.m. His stomach dropped. If there was ever any hope of keeping his personal disaster from bleeding into his professional life, it had just vanished. Meanwhile, Natalie sat a few blocks away, sipping on her coffee and scrolling through her phone. She had expected Damien to call her by now, to text her frantically, but he hadn't. He was probably too stunned, too busy trying to salvage the wreckage of his reputation. A smirk played at her lips. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about balance, about letting the weight of his own lies crush him, just as he had so carelessly crushed her trust. And by the end of the day, when the HR meeting concluded and the rumors had fully spread through the company, Damien would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. For once he would feel powerless. And that, Natalie thought, was worth every second of planning. Damien sat in the HR meeting room, his mind spinning as the walls seemed to close in around him. The room smelled of stale coffee and office-grade air freshener, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Across the long conference table, the director of human resources, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone, was reading through the company's ethics policy. "This company values integrity," she said coolly, tapping her nails against a printed document. "We expect our employees, especially those in leadership positions, to maintain professional conduct both in and out of the workplace." Damien swallowed hard. It was clear they weren't just talking about his work performance. Someone, probably Natalie, had sent those photos to HR, ensuring that his affair wasn't just a personal scandal but a professional liability. He could already imagine the headlines if this got out. A senior executive caught in a corporate scandal, engaging in questionable relationships with a marketing director from a competing firm. The optics were disastrous. "Due to recent events," the HR director continued, "we have reason to believe that your actions could compromise the company's reputation. We need to have a serious conversation about your future here." His future. For years, Damien had carefully built his career, climbed the corporate ladder with charm and calculated moves. He had always thought himself untouchable. Now, all of that was unraveling. His boss, an older man who had once sung his praises in meetings, barely looked at him. His co-workers, who had once admired him, now whispered behind his back. The respect he had taken for granted was gone. "Effective immediately, you are placed on indefinite leave while we conduct a full review," the HR director announced. Damien's mouth went dry. "Wait, indefinite leave?" He tried to keep his voice steady, but panic seeped through. "That's unnecessary. This is a personal matter, and it has nothing to do with my work." The HR director raised an eyebrow. "We disagree. The company cannot afford this kind of distraction, and given the evidence we've received, your actions reflect poorly on our leadership team. We will be in touch with next steps." Next steps. That meant they were deciding whether to fire him outright. The realization struck him like a punch to the gut. He had thought he could keep his double life separate: his work, his relationship with Natalie, his affairs. But in the end, it had all crashed together in the worst way possible. The meeting ended and Damien was escorted out of the building. The walk through the office felt longer than usual. Every step felt heavy, his ears buzzing with the sound of muffled laughter, side glances, and hushed conversations. By the time he reached his car, his hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. There was only one thing left to do. He called Natalie. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then, just as he thought she might pick up, the call was declined. He tried again, straight to voicemail. Frustrated, he opened his messages and typed, "Natalie, we need to talk. Please." No response. A few minutes later, he tried calling again, but this time the screen flashed with a final, brutal message. "This number is no longer available." She had blocked him. Damien sat in his car, staring blankly at the screen, his entire world crumbling around him. Everything he had taken for granted, his job, his reputation, his relationship, was gone. And the worst part, he had done it to himself. Across town, Natalie sat in her apartment, her phone resting on the table next to a half-empty glass of wine. She had seen the calls, the messages, but she had no interest in responding. She had said everything she needed to say. Damien had built his life on deception, thinking he could have everything without consequence. Now he knew what it felt like to lose everything in the blink of an eye. Natalie took a slow sip of her wine, exhaling in satisfaction. Revenge was a dish best served elegantly, and she had just delivered it flawlessly.